Welcome to the show. All Things Right. I'm your host, Hugh. Today we're going to talk about the Twitter post that I put up earlier this morning. It's a link that I had put up to an article from a blog entitled Sheriff Leaks, and I highly suggest that you check out the entire blog. As I mentioned before, I am not the author of the blog. I know the author. He is taken up for a great cause. Once again, I say do your own research, and this blog is a great start for research into matters dealing with El Paso and how they affect our nation, because this needs to be brought out into the light, needs to be brought to everybody's attention. Anyway, in dealing with this specific situation, the specific story, dealing with this officer from the sheriff's office. I know this officer. Matter of fact, I'm related to this officer, so I have first-hand information as to what happened to this officer, and there's a backstory, and that's why I am going to make this video. And there's a backstory to the Daca recipient. I want to go ahead and give a quick background on this person. This person was brought to the United States. Well, this person was born in Mexico, Juarez, Mexico, and was brought to the United States by their parents and abandoned, actually, by their parents. It is a sad story. I feel bad for them, and I feel bad for the whole situation. However, as time went on, things began to go awry with this person and their adherence to laws. However, I will continue. This person was abandoned by their parents, and they were taken in by their family here in El Paso, who were citizens. And this person who I'm related to, his aunt actually took I guess custody of this child back in the 80s, and eventually raised this child. Now, this woman who took custody of this illegal immigrant when she was approximately, I think, 3 years old, something like that, had plenty of opportunity to make her a citizen. And she didn't. What she did was this woman chose to steal a social security number and give it to this little child later on. And this child eventually went to school. And from what I know now, this person, who is in their 30s now, actually graduated college. Now, this person who I'm talking about, this Daca recipient, went to Internal Affairs and made a complaint against an officer, and it's this person who I'm related to. Went to Internal Affairs back in 2007, made a complaint that this officer, who she is technically related to, was harassing her because, and this is back in the MySpace days, because they had been having a back and forth argument, because the officer that I'm related to, he used to live with this lady who took custody of this illegal immigrant back when she was a child, he used to live with this person. He used to live at their home, and his address was still on the driver's license, and there was, at that point in time in the sheriff's office, a lot of scrutiny surrounding people who you lived with, people who were breaking the law, and people who you were associated with. So he kept advising this person, who was a Daca recipient, and also at the time had several warrants out for their arrest. He kept advising this person, hey, you need to take care of these warrants, and you need to take care of your immigration status. And it kept progressing from there to where the Daca recipient went to the sheriff's office and filed an internal case that ended up being an internal affairs case, to where the officer ended up getting suspended. And why that ended up being a situation, I have no clue. And I later found out through this person who I am related to, who is the officer that got suspended. He found out through further investigation that this happened after Sheriff Samaniego passed away, and the sheriff that took over the organization was Jimmy Apodaca. And at that point in time, Jimmy Apodaca was said to have already colluded with the gentleman who is now the sheriff of El Paso. And as we mentioned in the other video, Sheriff of El Paso now is involved in tons of illegal and nefarious and dangerous things. And Jimmy Apodaca is said to have gone, or rather is said to have had a meeting with the now Sheriff of El Paso and his attorney at the home of Sheriff Samaniego on his, in his deathbed, and I guess pledged to support to the then candidate for sheriff of El Paso, as Sheriff Samaniego was dying in his home. Anyway, long story short, all this transpired after this officer who got suspended. Okay, he was campaigning for, at that time, Marvin Riles, and later on Carlos de Leon, at that time, for sheriff, and that was who the Sheriff's Officers Union was representing and endorsing at the time. And this officer who got suspended, we'll call him suspended officer. So suspended officer invested a lot of time, invested a lot of effort, and even went as far as to gain information from El Velarde, who was the spokesman for the El Paso Police Department many years ago, who was also campaigning for Carlos de Leon at the time to become sheriff. He gained information about the person who was the sheriff now. The sheriff now, we'll go ahead and nickname him Willie. We'll call him Sheriff Willie, if you will. Okay. So El Velarde gave suspended officer information about Slick Willie, and Slick Willie, it turns out, obviously is involved in underage sex, sex with underage boys, and is a homosexual, all that kind of good stuff. So suspended officer immediately calls a journalist, and that he calls the journalist and informed him, and the journalist turns out to suspended officer's dismay is actually a friend of Sheriff Slick Willie. So all this being said, transpires this whole situation with the Daca recipient. Now, approximately 2 weeks before the whole internal affairs case was even presented, the suspended officer spoke to a customs officer who is friends with the Daca recipient and the Daca recipient's mother in the jail, and told them, hey, what's going on with her legal status. And the customs agent, whose name is Melissa, said, hey, don't tell me about that, and pointed at her badge. And she left it at that. Now, this customs agent is supposedly a really good friend of the Daca recipient and the Daca recipient's mother since way back in since the 80s and throughout the 90s. And there was a lot of cover-up through there, so it makes me wonder if this customs agent had to do with the acquiring of the Social Security number. I don't know. But this is a clear-cut case of a Daca recipient lashing out because of their fear of either being discovered as being illegal, or being arrested for the illegal warrants, or not rather illegal warrants, but the warrants for their arrest, because the warrants for their arrest was clearly in the system. And so that's a situation with this, and you tend to wonder how a Daca recipient, a person who was not a citizen, is not a citizen, was able to wield such power over a person who was enforcing the law, a person who was a sworn officer, and as to what connections they had. Don't take my word for it, people. Do your own research. Do your own research. Don't take my word for it. Slick Willie. Research about Slick Willie. I'm not going to name the Daca recipient. I'm not going to name her mother. If the authorities want to contact me about that person, I'll be glad to give them information. But this is a true story, and unfortunately it transpired to a person that I know very well. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. All things right.